I'm going to tell you something that still gives me nightmares. I've tried forgetting it, convincing myself it didn't happen, but I can't. It's like the memory is stitched into my brain, and sometimes I think it's waiting for me. It started when I moved into this house. A rental, nothing fancy, just a small 2-bedroom place on the outskirts of town. I was looking for something cheap, and when the landlord offered to knock a couple $100 off the rent because of some repairs he hadn't finished, I jumped on it. The house itself was fine. Old, creaky floors, drafty windows, but nothing that screamed run. It had this weird vibe, though, like it didn't quite want to be lived in. The first couple of nights were normal. I unpacked, settled in, got used to the sounds of the house. You know, the usual groans and creaks old places make. But by the third night, I started noticing something. It was small at first. I'd hear faint noises at night, scratching like someone was dragging their nails across the floorboards. I chalked it up to mice, or maybe the house settling. No big deal. Then, one night, I heard it again, this time louder, coming from the living room. It wasn't just scratching anymore. It sounded like something was moving. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and crept into the living room. The sound stopped the second I stepped inside. Everything looked normal, furniture where it should be, no signs of an animal. But as I was turning to leave, I noticed something strange. The floorboards near the center of the room were different. The wood looked newer, like it didn't match the rest of the floor, and there were these tiny gaps between the boards, like they hadn't been nailed down properly. I told myself I'd ask the landlord about it, but honestly, I didn't think much of it at the time. That changed the next night. I was in bed, dead asleep, when I woke up to this loud thud, like something heavy had fallen onto the floor. I sat up, heart racing, and listened. That's when I heard it again, the scratching. Only this time it wasn't faint. It was loud, deliberate, coming from the living room. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A low guttural breathing. It wasn't like an animal. It was deeper, raspier, like someone or something was struggling to breathe. I didn't want to go out there, but I also couldn't just sit there doing nothing. I grabbed a baseball bat I kept under my bed and slowly made my way to the living room. The sound stopped as soon as I stepped in, but this time, something was different. The floorboards in the center of the room were slightly raised, like they'd been pushed up from underneath. I froze. I knew I should leave, call the landlord, call the cops, call someone, but I couldn't. My curiosity got the better of me. I moved the coffee table aside and knelt down to inspect the floorboards. As I ran my fingers over the edges, I realized they weren't nailed down at all. They were just placed there, like a lid. I hesitated, but then I grabbed the edge of one of the boards and lifted it. What I found underneath, I'll never forget. It was a small, dark hole, like a crawl space, but it didn't make any sense. The house didn't have a basement. The landlord had said so. But this space went deep, far deeper than it should have. And the smell, it hit me like a punch to the gut. Rotten meat, damp earth, and something else. Something I can't even describe. I shined my flashlight down into the hole, and at first, I thought it was empty. But then, in the beam of light, I saw it. A hand. It wasn't human. The fingers were too long, the skin pale and stretched tight over jagged bones. It was just lying there, motionless, like it was waiting. Before I could even process what I was looking at, The hand moved. It twitched, the fingers curling slowly like it had just woken up. And then, from deep in the hole, I heard it again, that horrible, rasping breath. I dropped the board back in place and scrambled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even go back into the living room. The next day, I called the landlord. I didn't tell him about the hand. I just said I'd found a weird hole in the floor and asked what it was. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he said, "You didn't open it, did you?" I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I said, "What's under there?" He sighed and said, "Look, I don't know what it is. The house has always been strange. My dad used to say the floor was keeping something down there. I thought it was just some old superstition, but if you opened it, you need to leave. Now." I didn't argue. I packed my things and was out of the house by that afternoon. Here's the thing, though. A couple of weeks later, I drove by the house just to see if it was still there. It was gone. The entire property was fenced off, and there was nothing but a pile of rubble where the house used to be. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that hand. I think about what would have happened if I'd stayed a little longer. And sometimes, when I lie awake in bed, I swear I can still hear it, the scratching, the breathing, like it's waiting for me to come back.